are the mighty, made by God to stand strong, created by God to live for what is right and what is true. We are called by God to help those in need. Now is the time. Together, lift your voice to heaven, rise up and pledge. I will have heart. I will have courage. I will have wisdom. I will have hope. I will have power. I am God's hero. So this is our calling. Together we must rise and stand and say as one. I will have heart. I will have courage. I will have wisdom. I will have hope. I will have power. I am God's hero.
Reach up to the sky and see. Can you touch the air you breathe? Kinda like a mystery. Can't see the air, but we know that it's there. That's how God made you and me. It's by faith that we believe. Step by step we trust where it leads. Follow your heart. It's time to start. Let's go! Jump into the action. Let's run the race. Believe and take a leap of faith. Strong and courageous, whatever we face. Believe and take a leap of faith. Believe and take a leap of faith. Feel a bit lost and unsure. Directions are found in God's word. The power of faith is superb. Trust God and see where it can lead. Let's go! Jump into the action. Let's run the race. Believe and take a leap of faith. Strong and courageous, whatever we face. Believe and take a leap of faith. Believe and take a leap of faith. Come on, if you're ready, let's jump. Come on, if you're ready, let's jump. Come on, if you're ready, let's jump. Jump, jump, jump. Jump, jump, jump. Jump into the action. Let's run the race. Believe and take a leap of faith. Strong and courageous, whatever we face. Believe and take a leap of faith. Believe and take a leap of faith.
I am reading from Romans chapter 1, verses 16 through 21 in the New Revised Standard Version. For I am not ashamed of the gospel. It is the power of God for salvation to everyone who has faith, to the Jews first, and also to the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed through faith, for faith, as it is written, the one who is righteous will live by faith. For what can we be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. Ever since the creation of the world, his eternal power and divine nature, invisible though they are, have been understood and seen through the things he has made. So they are without excuse, for they knew God. They did not honor him or as God or give thanks to him, for they became futile in their thinking, and their senseless minds were darkened.
I am reading from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 7, verses 21 through 29. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father in heaven. On that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name and do many deeds of power in your name? Then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Go away from me, you evildoers. Everyone then who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a wise man who built his house on a rock. The rain fell, the floods came, the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall, because it had been founded on rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain fell, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was the fall. Now when Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were astounded at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority and not as their scribes.
May God bless the reading, hearing, and understanding of these words spoken this morning. I want to start off this morning by thanking Reverend Michael Olmsted for his willingness to come in front of what I just assumed was a hostile crowd last week. But we are lucky to have him as a part of our congregation, and lucky that he is willing to come and speak and give the message. The deal we had was that he could preach for 45 minutes. And I listened to it, and I went through it, and I noticed that he left 20 minutes on the table. Oh, okay. But as one who recycles everything and does not let anything go to waste, I am going to take those 20 minutes and use them here this morning. I hope you're ready. But we start this morning in Matthew. We start at the conclusion of a specific section in Matthew. For chapter 7 ends what we know as the Sermon on the Mount, of Matthew's recollection of that teaching and preaching of Christ to the crowd. And it is through those words that Christ gave on that mount that helped the gathering crowd to understand and know the love and the will of God in this world. It gave them an understanding of what it meant to live in this world and to live with others in this world. And so we have Jesus wrapping up and finishing and concluding what was being said. And he says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father in heaven. Not everyone who uses the name of the Lord, or everyone who speaks as if they have the name of the Lord on their hearts, is doing the will of God. It's an interesting thing to think about. Jesus can be on the lips and in the words of the people speaking, but their hearts, their thoughts, their minds, and their actions can be so far away from the will of God. We must look and understand and ask if they are living out the will of God or just speaking the name of Christ. And in Paul's letter to the Romans, the section we read today, Paul believes that God is known to everyone who is in creation. Because they are a part of this creation and they can look around the world, they know that God is there. They understand the greatness of God. They can feel God's presence among them. Because Paul says, ever since the creation of the world, God's eternal power and divine nature, invisible though they are, have been understood and seen through the things that God has made. Everything around us, everything we see, everything we touch, we feel, we hear, shows us that God is with us. Even though we can't see God, we know God is among us. But the problem becomes that because we are human, we are imperfect, we have a tendency to try and to do for ourselves. We have a tendency to understand that God is in the world, yes. But then we think God is in the world just for me. And so we do that. We act upon ourselves, forgetting the other, putting our own needs first and foremost above all others in this world. And that is what Paul is speaking out against in our text in Romans. Because when we turn that which was given to us by God, by the grace of God, freely given to us, into that which we can benefit from, and only we can benefit from, we are losing the truth and the love and the will that has been revealed to all of us through creation and through the Scriptures. And so Paul is getting angry. He is getting mad at the people that taking this truth that is revealed to them through the Gospels and everything surrounding them and then turning it around for their own personal gain, for their own desires. And in verses 20 through 21, we read, "So they are without excuse, for they knew God. They did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their senseless minds were darkened." Our minds, because we are human, always have the opportunity to be darkened to the other aspects of the world that are around us. And as was mentioned last week, we have an occasion to sit around with everyone and to brag about ourselves, to claim that we did it, to quote the song, my way. That this was our doing. Our ego can get in the way of what we do each and every day. The pride of the human mind has the ability to ignore, to reject God's love, to paraphrase what was said last week. And then to add on to this idea that the human mind has a way of turning all the good and the grace that was given to us into that which we can cash in on or turn into an ideal that will further our own agenda in this world. Not for God, but for us. But Paul lets us know that the Gospels can teach us about the salvation of God for everyone. For in the 16th verse of the first chapter of Romans, Paul says this to us: "For I am not ashamed of the gospel. It is the power of God for salvation to everyone who has faith, to the Jew and also to the Greek." Everyone who hears the words and acts upon them should not be ashamed of what we read in the Gospels, because it is the gospel that teaches us about the will of God through the life of Christ. And today, this morning, we have Christ teaching to this crowd and to us. We have Jesus speaking directly to us in the gospel. That which we should not be ashamed of, that which we should not turn to our own personal advantage, but that which we should learn from and follow so that we too can have the will of God in our hearts. For in verse 24 of Matthew chapter 7, "Everyone then who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a wise person who built their house on rock." Everyone who hears these words and acts upon them. And so I want you to understand that it is not just enough to hear the words. It is not just enough to understand the words, but we must also act upon the words so that the world can understand the will of God. And this passage is not just saying words with no action, but it is also talking about doing action in this world without fully understanding the will of God. It takes an inward commitment as well as an outward expression of that inward commitment to follow the teachings of Christ. And Jesus warns us about those who will preach in His name, who will teach in His name, and who will do powers in His name, yet He still does not know them, for they, in their hearts, don't understand. We must be aware of the false prophets told to us on this sermon. In verse 15 of verse 15 of this chapter in Matthew. "For even though they are claiming to do acts in the name of God, we must look deeper and see what comes from those acts." Because Jesus tells us that we will know the good acts and the good that is done by the fruit that comes from those deeds. For all produce fruit, but some are good and some are bad. And you will know that those who are acting by the will of God, by the fruits that they produce, by the actions that come from the words they speak. If those words follow the gospel, then we know they are following the will of God. If the fruits go against what we read in the Gospels, then we know that they are just speaking words. So, my promise to you this morning is starting in August, after I get back from the rest of my vacation, we will start a sermon series going through the Sermon on the Mount according to Matthew. Because today we have heard the conclusion of that sermon. Today we have been told to hear these words and act upon them. So we need to hear those words so that we know what to act upon. And as the conclusion of the sermon goes, Jesus spoke to them, and the crowds realized. And in verse 28, we read, "Now when Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were astounded at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority, not just as the scribes. Jesus taught as authority. He didn't teach like the scribes. He didn't teach like those who read the words and then go out and teach others about the words, their interpretations of the words. He taught as an authority from God about the will of God. Jesus Christ is our authority. Jesus Christ is who we turn to understand our role in this world, and we hear his words in the Gospels, which bring us salvation. So it is up to us to build this church, this house, on a foundation of rock, so that all of those who are out in life's storms have a place to come, to seek shelter, to seek guidance, and to seek help from a place that will never disappear because it is built upon the foundation of Christ. It is up to us to hear the words, to speak the words, and then to act upon those words, not for us, but for God and all of God's children. But it is not always going to be easy because we are human. We are going to stumble, we are going to fall, we are going to give in to the temptations that this world offers to us. But we know that God is going to be there to forgive, to accept, and then to help us along the way as we try again to do God's will. Christ will be there. The Holy Spirit will be there to guide us. And we know that this community, this family, this church will always be there for each and every person who comes into the doors, to pick them up, to remind them that they are loved, that they are accepted, because that is the will of God. That is the words in the gospel that we are taught to listen, to understand, to not be ashamed, and then to act on God's will. Amen.
Long ago, the prophets spoke.
skies for amber waves of grain, for purple mountain majesties above the fruited plain. America, America, God shed for grace on thee, and crown thy good with servanthood from sea to shining sea. Oh, beautiful for heroes proved in liberating strife, who more than self their country loved, and mercy more than life. America, America, may God thy gold refine, till all success be nobleness, and every gain divine. Oh, beautiful for patriot dream that sees beyond the years, thine alabaster cities gleam